Settle in. I am Professor Whiskerton. The year before us is 1969, and what a year it chose to be. We begin where 1969 itself began, by leaving the planet. On the morning of July 16th, a rocket rose from the coast of Florida and pointed itself at the moon. 4 days later, on July 20th, Neil Armstrong descended a short metal ladder, paused at the bottom rung, and stepped onto another world. 600 million people watched on television, the largest live audience in human history at that point. Buzz Aldrin followed 17 minutes later and described what he saw as magnificent desolation. Above them, alone in the command module, Michael Collins orbited, cut off from all radio contact each time he passed behind the moon. He was, at those moments, the most isolated human being who had ever lived. The computer that guided Apollo 11 to the lunar surface had less processing power than the device most people now use to check the weather, and yet it landed. What strikes the careful observer is not the technology, it is the pace. 8 years before, no American had orbited the Earth. 8 years later, 2 men stood quietly on the moon. The 1960s had delivered assassinations, riots, and a war with no clear end. And then, on a July evening, 250,000 miles from all of that, something quietly impossible happened. But if walking on the moon was 1969's most visible act of ambition, its quietest may have outlasted it. On the evening of October 29th, a graduate student at UCLA sat down at a computer terminal and attempted to send a 2-word message, "Login," to a colleague at Stanford Research Institute 50 miles away. He typed the letter L. He typed the letter O. The system crashed. The student had to telephone Stanford to tell them what had occurred. And so the first message ever transmitted over what would one day become the internet was, entirely by accident, lo, as in lo and behold. The network was called ARPANET. It had 4 nodes. It had been funded by the Department of Defense, designed in theory to survive a nuclear strike by routing information around destroyed connections. Nobody in that room in October of 1969 was imagining email. Nobody was imagining anything beyond an experiment, a proof that 2 machines in 2 places could speak to each other. The world would spend the next 5 decades catching up to what happened that night. Less than 3 weeks before that first message was sent, 500,000 people were already crowded onto a dairy farm in upstate New York. Woodstock. 3 days of peace and music, as the ticket said, planned for 50,000 attendees. When the actual crowd arrived, the organizers realized, somewhat suddenly, that they were outnumbered. Fences came down. Admission became free. A small farming town of 500 people found itself hosting the largest gathering in the state of New York. It rained heavily. There was very little food and almost no sanitation. The roads in were so thoroughly clogged that Jimi Hendrix, arriving by helicopter, looked down at the gridlock from above. He would close the festival on Monday morning, long after most of the crowd had gone, playing the Star-Spangled Banner on guitar in a way that sounded like the country itself coming apart and reassembling. 2 births, 3 deaths, 500,000 people in the mud. And yet, almost no violence. In a year when American cities had burned, when universities had been occupied, when Vietnam dominated every front page, Woodstock held together. Whether it was the high point of a generation or a beautiful accident of circumstance, no one has quite agreed. perhaps it was both. While the festival captured the idealism of 1969, a different kind of resistance had already taken place, quieter, in a bar on Christopher Street in New York City. The Stonewall Inn was a gathering place for the gay and lesbian community at a time when homosexuality remained illegal in 49 of 50 American states. Police raids were routine. Patrons were arrested, humiliated, their names occasionally printed in newspapers the following morning. The drill was well rehearsed by both sides. On the night of June 28th, the drill failed. When officers entered, the patrons did not comply. Gay men, lesbians, drag queens, transgender women, they resisted. Coins and bottles were thrown. A crowd gathered in the street. The confrontation lasted through the night and then through the nights that followed. 6 days of demonstrations in Greenwich Village. The Stonewall riots did not produce immediate legislation, but they produced something more durable: organization. The Gay Liberation Front was founded within weeks. Marches were planned. The word community began for many people to mean something different than it had before. Every June in cities on every continent, people gather to mark Pride Month. The date they are marking is June 28, 1969, a raid that went wrong, or, depending on your perspective, precisely right. And yet, as 1969 moved toward its close, one more opening remained, a gentler one. On November 10th, a children's television program aired for the first time on American public broadcasting. It was called Sesame Street. The show had been designed with unusual care. Researchers had studied how children actually watch television, what sustains attention, what teaches letters, what makes a child feel that the world has room for them. The result was a program set on a city street, with neighbors who looked like real people, and large creatures who modeled patience and curiosity without condescension. Big Bird appeared in the first episode. So did Ernie and Bert, and Oscar, who lived, with a certain philosophy, in a trash can. The stated mission was specific: to close the educational gap between children from wealthy families and children from poor ones. Sesame Street would go on to broadcast in over 150 countries. In a year that had reached the moon, invented the internet, assembled 500,000 people in a field, and sparked a movement in a bar. Someone quietly built a sunny street where children could learn the alphabet. And it endured. And so the year 1969 drew to its close, having left Earth, sent 2 accidental letters across a wire, stood in the rain together, held its ground on a summer night, and opened a door for children on a television set. It was, by any measure, a great deal for a single year. Before we close the lecture hall, I am curious, which of these moments surprised you most? Leave it in the comments below. And if there is a year you would like examined next, name it. The next lecture may well be yours. Subscribe and you will not miss it. Thank you for watching. Class dismissed.